This kid, he could see something that others just didn't seem to notice. Hunters have to clear dungeons before they break. Otherwise, monsters spill out to feast on the world. Claude isn't high level. Even so, he's always diving into the toughest and protect people. One day he'll reach the top. His current party isn't exactly powerful. It should be enough for this dungeon. Inside the subway, Claude noticed something was wrong. When they spotted the monsters, the leader was the first to charge in. The others scattered like total amateurs. The healer's range was too short, and the party's tank was focused on attacking, not defending the mages. When a sneak attack came straight for our protagonist, he understood. This place wasn't normal, and this team he'd joined, something was really off about them. The reason for all this was the leader. Apparently, their plan was else to die here. The other hunters were furious with their leader, ready to die fighting, but Cloud saved the first one from a fatal blow. The team's mage felt it, the pure terror of being seconds from death, and he just froze. That's when Claude started shouting orders, directing the girl and the others. Once the monsters were defeated, the team turned their rage on the leader. He had to be insane trying to get them all killed. It made no sense, until now. It was finally clear. Their leader had been possessed by a demon. These creatures feed on the negative feelings of humans to get stronger. These guys had never seen anything like it. Only Claude knew what was happening. A demon's power can use your own fears against you, destroying you from the inside, and their leader's heart was the most vulnerable of all. They were all going to die here. Claude, on the other hand, for some reason, wasn't affected by the fear. He tried to attack the demon in multiple ways. The creature then taunted him, "Don't you care about killing the human body I'm possessing?" Believing the human would hesitate, the demon attacked recklessly, leaving itself wide open. But Claude, he didn't hold back. He attacked without a shred of doubt. For the very first time, the demon was the one who felt fear. Humans, they can't act this cold-blooded. The reason Nam Cheol-min's heart was so haunted, his younger brother. The guy wasn't evil. He's an amazing brother and one of the strongest hunters out there. But people always judged him for being the older brother, yet not as strong as Taemin. The demon warned him again, "To kill me, you'll have to kill Nam Cheol-min too." Cloud didn't hesitate. Again, the demon felt the pain rippling through its host's body. The creature raged and screamed, "You're the cruel demon here." But those words meant nothing to our protagonist, because he could see what others couldn't. Despite the resentment in Nam Cheol-min's heart, his pride was just as strong. If he had to sacrifice himself to save his team, he would do it. Cloud followed Cheol-min's will. The final blow sent the demon's head flying, but luck was on Nam Cheol-min's side. You see, Claude has an ability to attack a demon's spiritual body without harming the original host. When the team leader woke up, he was sure he'd been fatally struck. His teammates, understanding what happened, were just happy to see him alive. Shaking with adrenaline, Nam Cheol-min couldn't understand it. "I should be dead." Then Cloud said it again. "You don't have to worry because I'm here." Demons feed on people's fear, and Cloud, he's a demon hunter. He even congratulated Nam Cheol-min for his earlier courage. Cheol-min had never been praised by anyone other than his brother. It felt weird. But what was even weirder was this guy behind our protagonist pointing out, "You know, demons don't drop any loot when they die. That's why you're so broke." The reason for all this started long ago. One day, Lee Hoyol woke up, and he was no longer in control of his own body. It now belonged to Granfell Claude Arpaeus Romeo. That name, that's my character from the game I used to play. There was a famous VR game. It was
Today, there were many more hunters than usual gathered at the entrance of the Elm, as if something special had happened on the other side of the portal. The raid organizer asked the group to carefully check their supplies before starting, and not to stray far from the collection point. This time, the Flying Tiger sect was also here, so there was nothing to worry about. While everyone was happily discussing the mission, Maurice was preparing his equipment on the sidelines, recalling the events that no one was supposed to know about. Many had already noticed this guy and agreed to a dangerous raid just because he was here. Before awakening, they were all ordinary people, but 5 years ago, their abilities were determined by each person's past fate. Maurice did not believe in fate and believed that everyone chooses their own path. At this point, one of the guys decided to get to know the famous hunter, although he wanted to be alone for a while. It was his first time participating in a monster raid, so he was noticeably nervous today. However, the young man was laughing so merrily that he was most likely just looking for an excuse to talk to Maurice. Suddenly, 3 guys in the distance called him to warn the inexperienced newbie about one thing. The guy said that this gloomy loner was the most famous hunter, with whom it was better not to joke. He didn't lie, because Maurice's name was known to many, but not only for his successful raids on monsters. At that moment, he realized that their eyes had met, and Maurice seemed to suspect that he was being followed. It was better not to attract his attention, because this guy's mood often changed. The main reason for Maurice's notoriety was that he once killed his teammates and stole their powers. The system window of destiny was his main source of information that was not available to others. He possessed a rare, sinister power that allowed him to take the fates of the dead, along with all their mana. The classes of fate were divided into 5 categories. It was considered to be the divine class. Immediately behind them came the dragon class, which was almost as strong as the divine class. The demonic class was also strong, but compared to the divine class it was noticeably weaker. After him came the human class and the insect class, which were roughly equal in strength. Maurice belonged to the insect class, which was the worst possible rank. He simply wouldn't have the strength to kill another awakened one and take away his abilities. However, until now, no one believed that the guy was not involved in the murders of which he was suspected. But now was not the time to be upset, because a difficult raid awaited him, where he had to show all the experience he had gained. In front of him, he suddenly saw Olivia, who had been watching her lonely friend for a long time. There was to be a dinner party after the raid, and she hoped Maurice would be there. Stephen reminded them that the guy wasn't with them last time, so he had no right to refuse the dinner party a second time. However, this time too, Maurice asked not to wait for him, explaining that he was too lazy for such events. The girl even missed a school trip for this, which means Maurice must also put things aside. He was 10 years older than her, and it was clear that she would understand Maurice much better when she reached his age. It was the stupidest answer one could possibly hear, and Olivia didn't try to reason with her stubborn friend any further. Their friend was so funny that it was hard to hold back after he said another stupid thing. Turning around abruptly, Stephen noticed another member of the Flying Tiger sect nearby, who was one of its main representatives. It was Yakov, and he reminded them that they needed to get back to their positions quickly, because their mission was about to begin. There was no point in arguing, although at the end, Stephen did remind him that they would be waiting for him for dinner. Morris only promised to think about it, but he already knew himself and not make everyone nervous if he wanted to
shattering amount of power. A single, seemingly casual wave of his hand was enough to shatter the advanced, strength-measuring machine to pieces. A violent burst of energy
Song I Love You Aankhein for all the lovers and all the couples.
This story begins in the square, and people kept talking about how to bow down to the emperor. A magnificent palace looms before us, its main entrance lined with stone statues. The voice proclaimed that he was a blessing to the continent, a mercy sent from heaven, and that he was to be worshipped. Suddenly, a warrior's voice rang out from the middle of the square, but it was cut off by a sharp crack as his axe shattered into pieces. Another fighter was knocked down, his body cut in two. As it turned out, a violent clash between armed soldiers was taking place in the square. The emperor himself formed this army with a single mission. It was a special forces regiment called the Special Detachment. It was created solely to protect the great Emperor Kabalan. However, one fighter, who towered over the countless fallen soldiers, declared that it was all a complete lie. It was Jan, the captain of the special squad, who declared that he would take their lives, and then the life of the emperor. The broken bodies of the knights crawled towards him. They whispered that he should bow to the emperor and asked him to kill them. Then, one by one, they began to dissolve into thin air. The protagonist's eyes burned with hatred. Even after death, they remained nothing more than the emperor's puppets. The terrible soldier croaked once more that the emperor must be worshipped, and the maddened mountain of knights' bodies rushed at Jan. However, he struck with a furious blow with his blade, cutting the hated monster in half. Meanwhile, in the throne room, the fairy girl was watching the emperor, Leon Kabalan. Suddenly, he asked if the noise outside had scared her. However, he assured her that there was no need to worry. It was nothing special. When Jan entered the throne room, he said he couldn't believe it. It was Jan, his most loyal man, who dared to rebel. Then Jan, bloodied and beaten with his arm torn off, stepped forward. The emperor asked how long Yang had been a commander, and remarked that he still remembered the days when Yang was just a cadet. Serving in the Abyss of Solitude Special Corps Training Center, Jan started out as a slave warrior and worked his way up to the rank of commander. Now Jan had everything, and yet he still expressed dissatisfaction. The protagonist's face turned to stone. He broke the sharp spike stuck in his leg and without hesitation drove the jagged shard into his ear. With chilling calm, he pulled out the green insect that had clung to the tip of the thorn. His eyes flashed with anger as he told Leon that he was not happy with the bugs he was planting in people's heads. He insisted that he had not gotten everything, but instead had lost everything. Ian screamed that he didn't even have his own memories, and then Leon squeezed the little fairy in his hand. The hero roared, almost overcome with madness, demanding to know where his family was, who he really was, and what his life was worth. However, Leon grinned coldly and bit off the fairy's head, saying something in an unknown language. The next moment, something rushed past Ian, piercing the protagonist's chest. He froze with wide eyes as blood gushed from the wound. The long sword pierced him through and through, and he could hardly believe that Leon had struck. Then Leon rose to his feet with a cold laugh, and said that he didn't know how Jan knew the truth about the bug. He noted that he was very sorry because Jan was his favorite toy. Suddenly, the protagonist's vision became blurred and he fell into despair. His whole life was in vain. And yet, at that last moment, the image of the girl flashed through his fading thoughts. Then a voice rang out, frightening him and calling him to wake up. And then Jan's eyes opened in disbelief. He asked himself what had happened. He felt as if his heart had been pierced, and he wondered how he could still be alive. However, John told himself to calm down. He noticed that the place seemed familiar to him, although he could not remember why. He bent down. His palm touched the hard stone, but upon looking more closely, the hero realized that it was a huge stone sword. It was the symbol of the Special Corps training grounds, a monument before which countless soldiers died. Suddenly, Yang realized that his body had become younger, and he saw that the uniform he was wearing was the same one he had worn when he was a simple recruit. Suddenly, a shadow appeared behind him, and the mysterious figure told him to stop making noise. The stranger threw a punch, but Ian turned just in time to block it. His opponent chuckled that such was the price for distraction. His opponent, Roman, cadet number 12, said that insolence does not make John special, and he will not lose to him so easily. Now the hero remembered that his opponent was the 12th recruit in the Corps, and that his name was Roman. Roman chuckled and replied that it seemed like Jan really didn't have anything outstanding. He added that the training was just a pretext, and that in reality, he wanted to beat him up. The thing is, no one cares if a weakling like Ian gets crippled. The protagonist's thoughts became confused as he admitted that nothing made sense. However, he recognized the huge stone sword, his smaller body, and this conversation with Roman. His lips curled into a cold smile as he came to the conclusion that he had indeed returned back to the past. He told himself that he didn't care why time had rewound, because what mattered was that he could start over. He decided that this time he would not repeat his past mistakes, and this time he would definitely cut off the Emperor's head. After a moment's thought, he announced that he had something important to tell him. He told Roman that he would be 40 years old and still not have a girlfriend, and so he should give up and focus on training instead. Roman's face contorted with rage, and he rushed forward, shouting at Ian to stop talking nonsense. But Jan easily dodged the blow and mockingly remarked that he didn't think Roman's fists would be so slow. At that moment, rage overwhelmed Roman. He then summoned the 7th form of the Dark Spirit, the Raging Fury, barrage of blows, but Yang easily dodged them all. Jan noticed that this was not bad and closed the distance between them. Then he put his hand to Roman's chest and explained that being so close to the enemy, in a certain way. He then used his own version of the Dark Spirit's 7th attack, performing it from a distance of just 3 centimeters, sending Roman flying across the training grounds. A shocked Roman demanded to know how Yan had managed to use such advanced technology, but Yan ignored the question. Frowning, he rushed forward, shouting that the next step was to hit the target immediately after the blow. Sea lime, and therefore could not catch its own scent. Then he decided that he had to hurry, because time was running out. Because he couldn't hide if they set traps in the sky and nets on the ground against him. Suddenly he was distracted by something unusual. Looking into the distance, Jan noticed smoke. He noted that the chase would never have started a fire, meaning the only people who could have been heading that way were Jake or Todd. He knew what would happen if the fire wasn't put out. But he still forced himself not to think about it, because now was not. He remembered that he had originally taken the remaining members of the squad only to use them as bait. If they now attract attention to themselves, so much the better for him. But then suddenly Jan, mentally calling them idiots for the second time, jumped out of the tree and ran away. He did admit, however, that it might even be beneficial if they managed to survive. He strengthened his body with magic, and noted that he needed to put out the fire before his pursuers noticed him. However, he suddenly froze, his eyes widening as he felt a cold breeze run down his neck. Ian felt the gaze of death on himself, the same one that had haunted him more than once on the battlefield. He realized that someone was standing behind him, watching him. It seemed to him as if a snake was writhing behind his back, gradually wrapping itself around his body. Suddenly, someone said that they were glad that John was caught. Turning around, he heard the same voice continue, saying that he knew from the first glance that Jan was an unusual person. The stranger said he knew Jan would show himself, and that's exactly what happened. Damien stood behind him, smiling as he said that his instincts had been right, and Ian wondered in surprise what had brought Damien here. Meanwhile, he stopped and remarked that he was glad to meet him. Ian just frowned, pressed his lips tightly together, and looked at him. They were silent for a while, and suddenly lightning flashed in the sky. Noticing this, Damien assumed that a downpour would soon begin. But Ian remained silent, thinking that this simply couldn't be happening. He didn't understand what Damien was doing here. Meanwhile, Damien raised his hand to his face, looking thoughtfully at the sky, and asked if it would be limited to just one lightning bolt. Jan continued to think. Before escaping, he was convinced that the instructor had indeed left for the Imperial Palace. He had heard that during his visit, he had been reprimanded and almost sent to prison, and so he could not understand why Damien was here. Suddenly, he asked himself if the future had gone the wrong way. Ian wondered if his own actions could have influenced the course of events. And if that was true, he wanted to understand how exactly. He recalled the recent events. Ian decided that none of these actions could directly affect Damien. However, his antics created cracks that did not exist before his transformation, and they destroyed the future that was supposed to be his. Ian's thoughts were interrupted by Damien's voice, who asked what his opponent would throw this time. A crystal mole or an electric mouse? Ian frowned even more and wondered if he had noticed that too. Damien, meanwhile, wondered out loud whether Ian really thought he could escape. He admitted that he was impressed, as he had not expected Ian to be able to organize an escape in such a short time. He noted that Jan moved surprisingly quickly. Damien admitted that at first he was shocked and did not understand what had happened, but he immediately noticed him. He remarked that he had thought that only pathetic cockroaches lived here. But taking a closer look at Jan, I realized that among them was a truly interesting specimen. Jan, irritably cursing to himself, realized that he had done something stupid. He didn't know how much the future had changed, but he understood that it could hardly be worse than it was now. However, even this he was no longer sure of, because Damien was called one of the 3 swords of the continent, and he would receive his second name only later. But for now, he needed to focus on the present. At that moment, Damien suddenly laughed quietly and called Ian funny. Then he clapped his hands, laughing louder, and remarked that Jan must be thinking about how to kill him. He admitted that he hadn't had such pleasure in a long time, and asked Jan to tell him exactly how he was going to kill him. He explained that usually people in such situations only think about escape, but Jan acted completely differently. Then, covering his face with his hand, he decided to give Jan a unique opportunity. Suddenly becoming serious, he said that he allowed him to try to kill him, promising that if he succeeded, he would receive the freedom he so dreamed of. Ian shuddered when he heard these words and looked at Damien in surprise. He chuckled to himself, admitting that it was funny, because immediately after these words, even he himself began to look at him differently. He had never met such people. An ordinary cadet was able to kill a hellish monster and even destroy the team of pursuers. He possessed prudence, courage, and endurance, being on a completely different level from the rest of the rabble. Damien noted that Ian seemed to have been born to fulfill a special mission. Now he wondered what kind of monster he would become later. Damien mentally asked him to show him his skills, but instead of fighting, Ian suddenly fell to his knees, asking for help. Damien looked at this in surprise, unable to utter a word. Jan, pretending to be in despair, said that he suffered from terrible eyesight and therefore could not understand who was standing in front. He added that he had no intention of running away, explaining that he had been captured by other cadets and threatened with death if he did not comply. Jan exclaimed that he had actually been forced to escape by other cadets, and that the escape had been orchestrated by cadet number 12. Damien closed his eyes and agreed out loud with his words. But in his mind, he wondered if Ian really thought anyone would believe this performance. Ian didn't stop. Stumbling, he turned to Damien, and in the end burst into tears, no longer holding back his emotions. Damien realized that this was just a feint. He then swung his hand sharply, catching the thin knife that Ian had thrown at him. He realized that Jan had decided to take advantage of the moment when he was unprepared. Then he smiled, admitting it was a big disappointment. But suddenly Damien's eyes widened, noticing that the second knife was already rushing towards his face, almost piercing his eye. At the last moment he managed to dodge, and the knife only slightly grazed his cheek. Damien frowned in surprise. He was amazed that Ian was able to launch two knives at the same time along the same trajectory. Then, noticing the empty space in front of him, he realized that Ian had escaped. Damien wondered if this had really been his strategy. However, John, already in the air, declared that everything that was happening was exactly what he wanted. Damien froze, then turned around, trying to figure out when Ian had managed to do this. Then, without responding, Yang activated the 15th form of the elusive shadow, summoning a shadow to strengthen the attack. Suddenly, flashes of magical energy surrounded Ian, and he was forced to jump back, wondering if Damien had parried the attack. Having received a small wound, he straightened up and looked at the enemy. It was magical energy, and then the hero wondered in surprise whether it was possible. Meanwhile, Damien moved forward under the cover of black fog. In 1 second, he cut up almost all the trees, but Jan managed to dodge in time. He understood that if the instructor continued to pursue him, he would not be able to escape. So he took out his dagger, knowing that the time had come. Activating the secret technique of absorbing darkness, Yang tried to destroy the fog, but the blade of the knife in his hand could not withstand it, and cracked. The protagonist exclaimed and stepped aside, looking at the intact barrier. Damien recalled that he had promised to let Ian go if he won, after which he admitted that he did not want to lose such an interesting toy. Damien noted that Ian is a unique cockroach, and even if he had to play with only him for the rest of his life, he would never get tired of it. Ian frowned, noticing that Damien looked like he had been bitten by a rabid dog. However, his eyes suddenly widened, because on Damien's shoulder there was a sign that our hero had already encountered. Then he remembered the events 22 hours before the escape. In the corridor where the cadets' rooms were located, the instructor announced that roll call was over. Jan noted that this was his last night here. Clutching the medallion in his hands, he decided that he needed to get out as quickly as possible and return to his family. He knew nothing about his family, and all he had was an old medallion last night located. The events because Ian looked like he had been bitten by a rabid dog. However, his eyes suddenly widened, because on Damien's shoulder there was a sign that our hero had already encountered. Then he remembered the events 22 hours before the escape. In the corridor where the cadets' rooms were located, the instructor announced that roll call was over. Jan noted that this was his last night here. Clutching the medallion in his hands, he decided that he needed to get out as quickly as possible and return to his family. He knew nothing about his family, and all he had was an old medallion. He promised his family that they would soon be together and looked at the photograph, dreaming of living peacefully. Suddenly he let out a quiet cry, noticing something, and cursed. Part of the medallion cracked. Ian was frustrated, realizing that this was his only clue, but his attention was immediately drawn to the object hidden behind the shard. Finally, when Jan managed to partially remove the covering from the top cover of the medallion, he noticed an unusual pattern. He thought it might be a family crest. The design was engraved on the back of the medallion, and the hero did not understand why this was done, as if someone wanted to hide the pattern. He realized that if his family really did have a coat of arms, then he did not come from a family of commoners and slaves. Ian noted that he now had more leads. If he could find someone familiar with this symbol, he could find relatives. However, here he wondered, if this was a family crest, why did it end up on the body of the chief instructor? He saw a familiar pattern in the most unexpected place, and wondered if Damien could really be a member of his family. Jan continued to think, not believing his eyes. Suddenly, Damien declared that there was no other choice, and finding himself next to Ian, he smiled, saying that he would die right now. Ian flinched and managed to push off the ground at the last moment, launching his own attack before Damien could act. A bright flash of magical energy erupted in the air, and as he jumped back, Yang frowned, wondering if he had missed. Damien, still smiling, acknowledged the power of the attack, and asked with admiration where Ian had learned such moves. At the same time, dark clots of magical energy, created by the Shadow Sword, Black Dagger spell, began to rise near Damien's leg. These magical clots turned into sharp spikes that burst out of the ground where Ian stood. Ian did a backflip to avoid the spikes and was lucky to escape unhurt, with only a slight tear in his clothes. Stepping back to a safe distance, Ian dropped to one knee, hoping he could slip away when Damien became less attentive. But in this case, he would not understand how the symbol ended up on Damien's body. He assumed that Damien was somehow connected to his relatives. The hero remembered that a powerful uprising was brewing on the continent, which would be known as the Armenian Rebellion and would lead to the destruction of the kingdoms. The entire imperial family will be in great danger, but the ruler will suppress the rebellion with his great sword. He executed the organizers and their relatives and burned everyone else. People called this time a 20-day sunset. The main instigator of the rebellion was the illegitimate child of the previous emperor. No one knew the reasons for the uprising, as all records of these events had been destroyed. Everyone who remembered the rebel called him the Three Swords of the Continent, although he was better known as the chief instructor of the Special Forces Training Center. Suddenly, Damien noticed that Ian seemed to be deep in thought. Jan realized that if his family was somehow connected to Damien and the rebellion, it meant that his relatives could die in the upcoming uprising. Then he decided that he had to stop him. The escape plan would have to be postponed. He would have to stay in the center and win the instructor's trust. He assumed that Damien must think that he needed Ian himself, and he knew exactly what he could do to help. Ian admitted that he was amazed by his skill, as he did not expect Damien to personally pursue him, and the instructor was pleased with this admission. Ian added that the leader of the Special Forces probably appreciated Damien's efforts and was about to continue, but Damien approached and put his hand on his face. The hero cried out in amazement, and then the man threw him into the air, ran to the side, and threw him into the nearest tree. Damien angrily declared that it was a very funny joke. The force of the throw was so great that the tree broke and Ian was thrown to the side. When he finally stopped, he was coughing violently. Damien walked up to him, grabbed him by the collar, and lifting him into the air, admitted that he liked Ian, but he clearly couldn't watch his language. As Damien picked him up, he asked Ian if this was how he wanted to end his life, and Ian noted that even his cheeky tongue could be useful sometimes. Jan explained that, for example, he knew the captain's weak spot, which could kill him. Damien frowned in surprise and asked in anger how Ian could have known this. Then the hero raised his head mockingly and said that this concerned number 52 in Simons County. The hero stated that this was the captain's weak point. A few hours later, the instructor was back at the training center. Damien adjusted his gloves and cloak, noting that the clothes were a little small. He didn't expect to have to ruin his favorite uniform. However, closing his eyes, the man admitted that nothing could be done. After this, he and the other man walked down the stairs, his assistant walking behind, talking about the whereabouts of the 3 cadets. Remembering this, Damien said that he wished his assistant would just throw them into a mass grave, because he didn't want to worry about some bugs. The assistant replied that he would follow his instructions. Damien wanted to clarify something, but before he could, a man appeared in front of him. He noted that Damien pretends to be the busiest, although in reality, he has too much free time. Damien recognized the man. It was Rodrigo Mayer, captain of the first rank of the Special Forces. Rodrigo asked if he was just lazy and ordered him to explain what was happening. Damien, obediently closing his eyes and lowering his head, asked what Rodrigo had come for. He asked how the training was going. Damien replied that they were working hard, which surprised Rodrigo, as he had heard otherwise from other people. Damien added that he had heard that their cadets were superior in skill to the squad members. However, Rodrigo irritably stated that this was a lie. He said that the center's graduates possess monstrous abilities. Damien then asked if the squad members themselves were to blame for this, and noted that whoever was controlling them should be punished. Rodrigo thanked him for the advice and promised to take it into account, but Damien said there was nothing to thank him for. His assistant, standing a little to the side, noticed that the mana in the air was vibrating and the columns in the room were shaking. He was amazed, realizing that untrained people usually lose consciousness under such concentration. Finally, breaking the silence, Rodrigo admitted that he had heard that Damien had not appeared at the palace in accordance with the imperial decree. He explained that he had more important things to do and did not want to waste time on formal meetings. Then Rodrigo again turned his attention to Damien's words about the importance of affairs and asked what could be more important than fulfilling the emperor's decree. Damien was lost in thought, and Rodrigo remained silent, watching him with interest. Rodrigo then asked Damien if he thought the blue blood running through his veins would help him survive. He assumed that Damien hadn't shown up for the reception because the cadets in the center had escaped, and he wanted to explain what that meant if he couldn't even handle them. However, Damien interrupted him, saying that this time he had understood everything wrong, turned away and declared that there were no escapes. Rodrigo asked him again, and then Damien explained that the cadets had gone with the instructors to prepare for the exam. Suddenly, changing the subject, he asked Rodrigo if he had noticed that there were a lot of cockroaches here, and he, perplexed, asked what he was talking about. Damien noted that if he sees a bug in the center, he immediately crushes it. But he is annoyed that cockroaches continue to appear despite all his efforts. But then he suddenly said that he seemed to have found a nest of cockroaches and was going to destroy all the larvae. After this, Damien, having finished the conversation, announced that it was time to go, and wished Rodrigo a safe journey. Walking with his assistant, he thought he had managed to calm his emotions. After a short pause, He asked if everything the assistant had told him was really 100% true. But the assistant asked him not to worry and removed his mask, assuring him that he was not lying to his allies and that Damien would soon see this for himself. Damien turned and looked at Ian, who had been there the whole time, and he confirmed that all the information he had given was true. Recalling the abandoned street number 592 in Simons County, Ian noted that he once lived there. He remembered that there were almost no people there, and one day he shouted to someone to open the window, wanting to show something interesting. He said that he had caught a very large rat and asked his friend to take a look at it. Receiving no answer, he wondered if the man was really home. Suddenly he heard someone call him a fool. He saw the window open, and the girl he had played with as a child looked out, smiling and remarking that it would be better to bring a squirrel. Jan noted that it was the captain's daughter, the girl to whom he had told about the rat, who had been his friend in childhood. Jan noted that there were few children on the street, so everyone knew each other. Damien closed his eyes and checked to see if he had understood correctly that the girl Ian had played with as a child was the captain's daughter. Ian confirmed this, which greatly surprised Damien, realizing that he would hardly believe it, since the story seemed too incredible. There was hostility between the captain of the special detachment and the chief instructor. Damien has been searching the county for Rodrigo's weak spot, but so far his search has been unsuccessful. Remembering the look in Damien's eyes when he said he knew something about the captain, Ian noted that the reaction confirmed his words and decided to use this. Damien admitted that it was strange, even if Ian knew where the captain's daughter lived. He didn't understand why he considered it a weak point. Then Ian reported that he had heard it personally, and Damien, surprised, clarified the details. The hero remembered talking to a girl who said that she would soon leave this place. The girl sadly rested her head on her hands and explained that bad people wanted to harm her father, so they were looking for her to blackmail her. Her father suggested that she leave, and a few days later she disappeared, accompanied by men in black. It was only when Jan got here that he realized that they were soldiers from a special unit, and her father was the captain of the unit. After hearing this, Damien paused for a moment, thinking, and then smiled. He noted how amazingly everything was working out.
If you live in India and notice your daily costs going up while your income remains unchanged, this is your chance to act. A new government-approved platform backed by the National.
Jan turned out to be a friend of the captain's daughter, learned about the relationship between Damien and Rodrigo, about the search for a weak spot, and at the same time knew exactly where it was. He wondered if such incredible coincidences could exist. Suddenly, a pen flew towards Ian, and he was able to dodge the object, enhanced by Damien's magic, which hit the wall. Damien noted that rather than dismissing it all as a happy coincidence, it was more reasonable to think that Ian was the captain's spy. He chuckled, considering that a more logical explanation. Jan, wiping the blood from the scratch on his cheek with his palm, explained that this was natural. Such coincidences are truly incredible. He said that he was collecting information. He pieced together childhood memories, the captain's attitude toward family, the special forces hierarchy, and the feud between Damien and Rodrigo. He put this information together like a puzzle to use for his own survival. Ian noted that if he were the captain's spy, as Damien suggested, he would not have risked his life to escape. Instead, he would save the information in case the escape plan failed. The thing is, John decided to mix truth with lies in order to arouse both hope and disappointment in the chief instructor. His idea was that the scales of faith and doubt must be balanced so that faith would ultimately win. After this, Jan reported that he now knew where the captain's daughter was. Hearing this, Damien shuddered and looked at him intently. Jan decided to prove that it was more profitable to trust him, and then the instructor would have to tip the scales in his favor. Clenching his jaw, Damien stood up, walked to the window and looked out into the street, realizing what this could lead to. Ian simply watched intently, wondering if the scales were tipping. Then Damien smiled and asked if the goddess of luck really was Jan's patron. The protagonist was delighted that everything had worked out and confirmed Damien's guess, noting that he himself was acting as a talisman bringing good luck. Damien then ordered the conversation to end and promised to turn a blind eye to what had happened. He told Ian to return and remain silent. The hero noted to himself that the test had been passed. He understood that Damien did not believe every word, but he decided to act properly, without rushing. Ian asked Damien for forgiveness and hoped that he would have a good rest. Damien agreed. As he left, the man picked up his papers, noticing that he only had number 974. He was struck by the instructor's blindness, and assumed that either the grading system had malfunctioned or something else had happened. He was suddenly distracted by something in the documents about Jan, and after looking closer, he smiled, admitting that it was interesting. A week later, the first exam for the cadets of the special detachment began in the Klinka Mountains. The Emperor forbade entry into the mountain range because various monsters inhabited it, making the area extremely dangerous. One of the cadets swung his weapon, commanding the swamp goblin to die, and struck it down, cutting off its head. The monster fell to the ground, and the cadets, frozen but continuing to hold their weapons at the ready, looked at the dead enemy. Then one of them smiled relaxedly and joyfully exclaimed that now they would definitely succeed. But the cadet warned his friends to be careful, as there could be other monsters. But the others advised them to forget about it. They recalled that the instructors had said that they needed to survive in the mountains for a week to pass the exam, and noted that they would definitely cope. But the cadet still looked at them and reminded them to be quieter. He asked if they had forgotten about the other conditions of the exam. Ian reminded the cadets that they needed to kill monsters and collect mana stones. Their results would depend on the number of stones collected. He exclaimed that it would be wonderful if they could get past the cadets from the 4 great families. The leader of their squad again ordered his comrades to slow down. They needed to remain vigilant, and then their skills would be enough to survive. However, before he could finish, the monster's huge hand suddenly came down, grabbed his head, and broke his neck with a scream. His comrades, noticing what had happened, froze in horror. One of them, raising his shield, ordered the monster to retreat, while the other anxiously asked where this giant had come from. The monster, which turned out to be a great golden ogre, froze for a moment, and then, screaming, began to wave the body of the dead cadet in the air. It was a subspecies of ogre with invisibility magic, which allowed it to sneak up on prey unnoticed. Then he swung again, and with one blow destroyed the remaining 2 cadets. As a result, numbers 345 and 347 were eliminated from the test. Damien, who was watching this through a special sphere, laughed, calling them worthless. Looking at the other cadets, he warned the others to be careful, as he didn't think they even realized how tired they were from collecting bodies. Smiling, he advised them to get moving, and announced that he would send 50 cadets to the gate every 5 minutes. The cadets obediently declared that they would do as the instructor said. At that moment, Jan thought that sooner or later he would reach this damned place. Looking at Damien, he noticed that he was in a good mood. He had probably already ordered his bloodhounds to search for the indicated place. He understood that the hounds would be able to detect some traces, but they would not find anything valuable. To get closer to the head instructor, he needed to show excellent results on the exam. So Jan knew he would have to work on his body. Since he had only half mastered the divine dragon breath, his progress had a limit, and being on the ridge was his chance. He smiled, knowing that there were 2 treasures in the mountains that no one knew about yet. And if he could get these treasures, he would become stronger and faster. Suddenly he was distracted by someone's surprised voice. Ian noticed that Damien seemed puzzled. Suddenly he and his assistants fell to their knees, and someone ordered the others to show respect and greet the ruler of the Kabbalan Empire. Leon stepped forward, and when Ian noticed him, he froze, his eyes widening in surprise. If his memory served him correctly, 500 cadets died during the exam, but nothing special happened then. Taking a closer look at young Leon, Ian noticed that something unusual had happened, and he didn't understand why Leon was there. Jan was sure that such an event could not be forgotten. He remembered seeing Leon before his death. Ian thought for a moment, noting that Leon was the last person he saw before he died. It was the face of a monster for whom Jan's life was just a toy, and it horrified him. Suddenly, Leon announced that he was the crown prince of the Kabbalan Empire. The cadets also knelt down to greet him. Ian leaned over and pressed his lips together, admitting he would never regret it again. But anger flared up inside him again. Leon suddenly announced that the cadets must speak without fear. Then he suddenly asked those who wanted to leave this hellish place to raise their hands. He promised to ensure their safety, and ordered everyone who was forced here to report to him so that he could free them. Jan listened to his speech, his eyes widened in amazement, and he quietly asked himself what Leon was saying. He watched the cadets carefully and wondered if it was really the crown prince in front of him. He recalled the events of long ago when he was informed that the 4th Special Detachment had just invaded enemy territory. Jan, kneeling behind Leon, reported that the outcome was a success, as the information that the Mana Stone mine had been burned down was confirmed. Leon approved of this, noting the good work, and Jan, closing his eyes, warned that reinforcements would be sent for a safe retreat. He explained that the attack force was too small, and that they would not all be able to return safely on their own. However, Leon ordered that nothing be done, deciding that these warriors would sacrifice their lives to destroy even more enemies. Jan shuddered, looking at him with bewilderment and wanting to object, because he was sure that it was impossible to abandon the warriors fighting for the future of the Empire. However, Leon said that the world is a chessboard, where slaves, citizens of the Empire, knights and aristocrats exist only for the Emperor. Hundreds of thousands of people die for the sake of a single ruler. This is how an ideal world is structured. He thought with a smile that there was nothing more honorable than to die for the Emperor. Returning to reality, Ian mentally called Leon a vile bastard, because he knew what the prince really was. Meanwhile, Leon said that some children of aristocrats came to this place to gain power, but they better go home if they don't want to face the consequences when Leon takes the throne. The cadets began to mumble uncertainly, asking if this was really so. Ian was confused as to whether it could really be the same person, as he couldn't understand how Leon could have changed so much. At this time, Damien noted that the cadets were shocked by what they heard, and Leon asked why Damien treated the cadets so inhumanely. Damien explained that there was a special unit to ensure the Emperor's protection, but Leon threatened him again, ordering him not to talk nonsense. Leon continued his reflections, arguing that the Emperor must defend his people himself. He declared that the crown would not remain on the ruler's head for long if he sentenced to death those whom he was supposed to protect. He saw no point in power in such a case, and promised that this disgusting place would be destroyed. Damien objected, reminding them that this place had been created by the will of the Emperor, and that everything here was done in accordance with the law. Hearing Damien's words about the Emperor's will, Leon indignantly asked whether any of the cadets had agreed to take this exam. He promised to restore justice if at least one such cadet was found. Damien frowned, mentally calling Leon a populist. But suddenly one of the cadets stood up and apologized, attracting Leon's attention. It was Jan who gave his number and declared his desire to participate in the exam, repeating the number to himself. Leon noted that the number 974 sounded familiar. He stated that, as far as he knew, low-status cadets were often singled out, asking if Jan wanted to get out of this place. Jan replied that as Leon said, some did indeed treat the cadets badly, but in a certain sense they were equal regardless of rank. He confidently stated that equality must be maintained in the assessment of skills, thanks to which they can rise in the hierarchy. He wanted to pass the exam because he had something to strive for. Suddenly, Leon told the instructor that they didn't deserve such a cadet. He then promised that he would not go back on his word, allowing the exam to continue, but warned that he would personally oversee what was happening. Damien stepped forward and asked the others to take note of the prince's generosity, and told the cadets to do their best to thank him. Then one of the instructors explained to the cadets the operation of the transfer gates through which they would have to pass. They will be teleported to the mountain range, after which their exact location will be determined. He also warned that sometimes, due to errors, the bodies of some cadets may separate during teleportation, but assured that there was no need to worry. At the end, the instructor called out Ian's number, ordering him to stand in place, and then Ian took up a position on the glowing circle, and the instructors activated the gate. The hero frowned, thinking that Leon had never come to the training center in his past life, but now everything was different. He wondered if his actions had affected Leon, and what could have been the reason if not. When the countdown ended, the teleportation began, and Ian's body disappeared in a bright light. Jan's body gradually moved to the Blade Mountains. After examining himself, he noted that everything was fine. All his limbs were in place. As he walked forward, he wondered if the teleportation had thrown him into some wasteland, and he decided that he needed to find some kind of weapon. Suddenly, Jan caught a familiar scent and noted that he hadn't smelled it for a long time. He found himself in the Valley of the Winds, in the Blade Mountains. After analyzing the situation, he noted a mixture of the sulfuric smell with the demonic energy of the valley. Suddenly, a roar was heard behind him, and turning around, Ian noticed that a monster was jumping on him. Meanwhile, a huge cockatoo, Griffin, attacked a group of cadets with a scream. The boys, stuttering with fear, run away, assuming that the monster would kill them. The Griffin opened its mouth again, but suddenly its body was cut in half. It turned out that it was Lorena. She was using the 15th stage of Dark Soul Stardust. The cadets, recognizing her, shouted her name, Lorena, number 1 among the cadets. After inspecting the squad's condition, Lorena noticed many wounded, and asked if their squad really only consisted of low-ranking cadets. One of them explained that most of them were wearing 700 numbers, and many were injured. They were planning to get out of there, but the monsters blocked their way. With trembling voices, the cadets turned to Lorena with a request to be allowed to follow her, at least until they reached the exit of the valley, and she said that it made no difference to her. She lowered her head slightly and silently turned to Ian, wondering where he was. She couldn't believe that he was already out. He remained confident even in the presence of the prince, and Lorena did not understand why he did this at all. Suddenly, her thoughts were interrupted by Cruel, who came closer, and again hinted that she was making stupid decisions by calling her a princess. He looked at her with disdain and assumed that she was going to go with these cadets. Moving closer to Lorena, Cruel asked if she was really going to be their nanny. Lorena ordered him to watch his language, saying that you can't judge a person just by his number. Cruel chuckled, thinking that after the exam, another cadet would take first place. But Lorena warned him that if he only thought about numbers, he would miss something important. At this point, Casa, cadet number 3, intervened, noting that they had a lot of free time, judging by the way they were sorting things out. Casa also noted that Cruel is narrow-minded. They are given individual grades for the exam, but they do not have to compete with each other. He smiled and addressed the cadets, noting that the larger the squad, the better they would cope with crisis situations. Casa promised to help them pass the test, adding that as aristocrats they must show leadership over commoners. Then Cruel asked with a contemptuous smirk if he was really talking about aristocrats. He asked the guy since when a family of traders was considered aristocrats. He assumed that Casa wanted to rule over the commoners, and asked what the Afrain family had done for the people. Cruel said it would be sad to see the last days of the Afrain family, but Casa, despite these words, smiled. Thank Thanking Cruel for his concern, he admitted that sometimes he was very envious of Cruel. After all, his older brothers are responsible for the family, and he is free from these worries. Cruel froze, then suddenly raised his hand, about to attack Kesa, but someone stopped him. It was Lorena. She came closer and grabbed Cruel's hand. Cruel clenched his jaw in anger, trying to pull his hand away, but Lorena ordered him to calm down. Finally, the man ordered Lorena to let him go, pulled his hand away, turned around and walked away, calling them worthless. He continued walking, looking back and wondering what would be worse if he continued to cooperate with them. He remembered how, as a child, a man towering over him had ordered him not to ask for anything, and not to think about anything, to live as if he were dead. Returning to reality, cursed, as he didn't think he would ever remember this day again. Suddenly he noticed stains on the ground and wondered if it was blood. He followed the trail to the rocks and realized that the blood was fresh. He assumed that this might be a monster's lair and decided to hide and assess the situation. Suddenly, he became frightened when he noticed Jan, who was leaning over the bodies of the goblins. Cruel was surprised to see the cadet here, and noticing the many dead goblins, he thought that this cadet probably killed them all himself. Cruel's eyes widened as he wondered what the protagonist was doing. He was horrified to see Ian smiling and clutching one of the monster's organs in his hands, preparing to bring it to his mouth, and he wondered if he was eating goblins. Earlier, while walking in the mountains, Ian noticed two artifacts in the Blade Mountains, representing two clusters of magical energy. He decided that he had to obtain these artifacts for his plan to work. Jan was about to get the first artifact, but was suddenly distracted when he noticed a monster trying to attack him. However, Jan suddenly attacked the monster, piercing its body with his hand, while simultaneously removing the creature's heart. To strengthen his attack, he used the 21st form of the Black Dark Spirit, the Flame Dragon. He watched as the fire engulfed the body, and soon the monster disappeared with a scream. Meanwhile, other monsters surrounded Ian, looking at him with predatory eyes. However, he felt no fear in the face of so many opponents, and only frowned, considering it a great success. Ian was surprised that the first target literally jumped into his hands, and he suddenly rushed forward, raising his hand and concentrating magical energy. He noted that magic stones are a reward for defeating monsters. Previously, they were used only as raw materials for creating magical items. But one day an incident occurred after which the value of these stones was rethought. At the academy, Professor Isaac published a scientific paper. There he wrote that with the help of magic stones one can absorb the abilities of monsters, as well as their mana. Thanks to this, it was possible to obtain the endurance of orcs, the regeneration of trolls, and the physical strength of ogres. Naturally, this work caused outrage in scientific circles, with scientists declaring that the use of mana by humans and monsters differed greatly. Dean Neuron turned to Professor Isaac and asked if he could prove it. Sometime later, looking at his altered body, he asked in surprise if it had really worked. The scientific work was confirmed, and when Professor Isaac's statement was confirmed, people who used mana were alarmed. It was now easier to find a monster in a pharmacy than in a dungeon. Monster body parts were stored in a special liquid in vials. From Isaac's research, it was clear that absorbing mana crystals to extract the poison was quite a difficult process. This required moon beetle juice and lava stones. Normal mana absorption was much easier, as the stone simply had to be eaten. Remembering all this, the protagonist bit off a piece of the monster's magic stone, chewed it, and noted that he didn't think he would have to do it again. It tasted bad now, but he knew he had to swallow the stone that was connected to the monster's heart, as two parts of one whole. He noted that in order to absorb mana from the stone, the monster's poison would first have to be neutralized. Suddenly, Ian jerked, covering his mouth with his hand, as he felt like he was about to vomit. He knew he should be ready to die. Feeling the poison eating away at him from within, Yang noted that he could neutralize it with the divine dragon breathing technique. After using the magic, he felt relieved, and noted that it wasn't that bad. But there was no need to rush. Suddenly, Cruel jumped out from his hiding place and attacked him, strengthening his attack with magical energy. Cruel chuckled, admitting that he didn't expect to meet a cadet with such a low level, but Ian wouldn't be able to defeat him, and he would take the mana for himself. However, he was surprised to notice that there was no one under his feet, and looking around, asked where John had disappeared to. The protagonist stood quietly a little to the side and explained that in the Blade Mountains, there are things more dangerous than monsters, referring to the likes of Cruel. He continued, saying that he had heard of barbarians devouring monsters, but admitted that this looked even more vile than he expected. Cruel called the protagonist worthless, claiming that he would beat him to death, but promised to spare him if he gave him all the magic stones he had collected. The main character, looking at him with surprise, noted that he had already eaten the stones, but Cruel ordered him not to lie. He ordered him to give up the crystals if Ian wanted to stay alive. The main character, unexpectedly agreeing with his words, grinned. He noted that there really was no one here, and no one would recognize him. Cruel misread his mood and agreed, noting that he respected his choice and ordered him not to even utter a peep. But suddenly Jan was very close and swinging his sword delivered a powerful blow. Long before this, in Dwight's mansion, Cruel, as a child, believed that he should become the next owner of the mansion. Already at the age of 12, he understood that most of the world was inhabited by scum, and that he himself was the heir. But there were two bastards standing over him who were afraid that he would become the head of their clan. He recalled that under the guise of caring about his education, he was sent to a special training center and thrown into a stinking dump. He was angry and swore that he would never forgive it, but Cruel was confident that he was the true heir of the Dwight line, and would rise above the rest of the rabble. At that moment, Jan hit Cruel, not expecting such a blow. He coughed, and a stream of blood flew out of his mouth. Later, in the snake gorges, the only passage under the cliffs, Cruel asked Jan if he dared to do it. He insulted his interlocutor, asking how he dared to treat him like that. He carried a sack containing the bodies of the slain goblins, and admitted that he didn't know what Ian intended to do. However, Cruel knew for sure that he would not succeed. He walked with a rope around his neck, but despite his position, he continued to claim that he was the true heir of the Dwight family. The hero, leading him by the rope, ordered him to be silent and move faster, tugging at the collar. Cruel asked them to wait, but Jan pulled the rope again, warning them that they had a long way to go, and again ordering them to move. Cruel followed him and asked why he had to do this. Jan explained that it was Cruel's fault, noting that the punishment was even too light. Cruel didn't understand what this meant and asked what the protagonist was going to do with all the goblin bodies, but Ian simply ordered him to shut up. Cruel suddenly chuckled and asked if Jan knew that according to the laws of the Empire, he would be punished for mistreating a nobleman. However, before he could finish, Jan threw a rock at him, which hit him in the face. Cruel collapsed to the ground, his knees pulled to his chest and his face covered with his hands, crying out in pain as the rock hit him square in the nose. The protagonist, ignoring his suffering, ordered him to get up, asking if it hurt nobles to be slapped. Suddenly, Cruel remembered how he had tried to catch him off guard by attacking suddenly, and how after that blow he was going to attack again, promising to kill Ian. However, the protagonist easily repelled his attack with a slap, and repeated that this was not the way to do things. Cruel rushed to attack again, but Jan managed to parry all the blows, slapping him again. The nobleman did not expect such a humiliating reaction. In the end, they continued on their way, and the hero noted that even if a person makes a mistake, after a proper apology, he can avoid being hit in the face. Cruel lowered his head and thought that he couldn't lose to Ian. Even though he couldn't concentrate his mana flow during the fight, he intended to kill him. Then Jan suddenly turned around and assumed that Cruel hadn't understood what he had said. He was flashed red and asked if he really needed to repeat what he had said. Cruel frowned, wanting to say something, but then suddenly calmed down and admitted that he respected Ian and would like to be friends with him in the future. Then Jan continued on his way, turning around from time to time and thinking that Cruel was an amazing person. Despite his thirst for life, the energy emanated from him in a chaotic rhythm. Jan noted that only demonic knowledge could provide such power. He noted that there are magicians who use black magic, but there are also warriors who use darkness in sword combat. They achieve success faster. However, those who used black magic gradually lost their minds and health until the darkness completely consumed them, driving them to madness. In his past life, Cruel was nicknamed Bloodstar. The fact is that he led the family solely by his cruelty. Ian believed it was related to demonic knowledge, but assumed Cruel had not yet fully mastered it. Suddenly, Cruel asked him to wait and take off the collar. Jan thought that he decided to run away, but Cruel reminded that this was the only way. He wondered if Ian realized what others would think of them, and came to the conclusion that Ian did, having agreed to remove the collar. Then Cruel finally took off the collar. He assumed that the protagonist would now drag him along, but he warned that his suffering would soon end. Since they were there, and Cruel, not understanding where they were, asked about it. Ian walked to the edge of the cliff, frowning, and noted that the real treasure was kept here. Cruel approached, and together they looked at the lair under the cliff, and the protagonist noted that it was more of a monster than a treasure. Cruel admitted he couldn't believe Ian had made him drag all those monsters here just to throw them away. He dropped the bag of goblins and asked if his work was now finished. Jan said that as a token of gratitude for the work done, he would give advice. Then he smiled and ordered him to run away and not look back. This must be done immediately. The next moment, particles of magical energy appeared in the gorge, and the monster's eyes lit up terrifyingly. Due to the discarded goblin bodies, magic was activated, and the spilled blood began to connect into lines, forming a magic circle. When all the lines of the magic circle connected, the monster emerged from the circle and angrily asked who dared to wake him up. Cruel, watching the scene in amazement, asked what Jan was doing, but the protagonist ignored the question and responded by asking what Cruel himself was doing. Suddenly, the monster really began to rise sharply from the bottom of the shelter, ordering them to give him their souls. A shining eye appeared on his dark body. At this time, Casa asked if Lorena felt it too, and she agreed, noting that she felt an excess of black magic. Looking into the distance, they noticed a pillar of magical energy rising into the sky, and Lorena reported that it was coming from the Snake Gorge. She wondered what had happened there, and Casa admitted that he had never seen anything like it, and therefore wasn't sure what they should do. They continued to watch the beam of magical energy that began to form into a ball of magic in the sky, wondering about its power. Suddenly, Lorena announced a change of plans and began to walk away, stating that they should return to the gate immediately. She then addressed the cadets and ordered everyone to immediately retreat to the gate, discarding all unnecessary equipment, including mana crystals. Casa, asking the girl to wait, asked her what the rush was, and Lorena reminded him that he had recently asked her how strong this black magic was. Lorena noted that the magic was as strong as her father's. Casa, amazed, could not believe it. Since Lorena's father was the divine guardian of the North, he was known for his incredible strength and being one of the 5 fingers of the Empire. He asked if magic could be as powerful. The boy noted with alarm that no instructor at the training center could stop such a monster. At that moment, dark magic appeared in the instructor's location. One of them, noticing this, attracted the attention of his colleagues, pointing to the side, and asked what it was. He explained that something was flying there. Meanwhile, the monster said that he still didn't have enough, and he wanted to get even more of what he needed. The next moment, the instructors' bodies began to fall to the ground due to the magical force breaking their necks. Meanwhile, another cadet who was fighting alongside Roman exclaimed that this was absurd and swung his sword, trying to fight back. Following this, fire appeared around them and they screamed in incredible pain. The monster, sticking out his tongue, on which a magic circle appeared, ordered the others to give him their souls. At this time, the cadets who were with Lorena and Casa ran to the gate, but suddenly someone from the side said that they heard a strange sound. Lorena ordered everyone to stop and, frowning, sternly asked the man who appeared in front of them who he was. The man blocking the gate said that a voice in his head told him not to stop. It ordered him to give up his soul. He raised his head, extended his hand forward, and repeated that he must give up his soul. The next moment, his body began to deform. The next moment, the boy's body exploded, spraying blood into the air. Lorena assumed a fighting stance and asked if this was an ambush, while Casa, pointing his finger forward, told Lorena to look there. The blood that spilled from the boy's body began to form a pattern, and when the outline of the pattern became visible, everyone realized that it was a magical seal. The monster that appeared through the seal reported that he had found the cadets. One of them grabbed his head with his hands, feeling an unpleasant sensation. The other covered his mouth with his hand. Lorena, looking ahead carefully, warned everyone to be careful. Suddenly, the monster emerged from the magic circle, declaring that it was the cadets who awakened him. He thanked the cadets because it was thanks to them that he woke up. The monster, which was an ancient lich, appeared in full before the cadets, declaring that it would repay them with death. Once upon a time, magicians regretted that magic was infinite and human life was finite, and they tried to correct this. Greedy mages found a way to master all magic by activating such circles, selling their souls to the darkness and gaining eternity. One of these magicians, having activated the circle, tore off his own head. As a result, he turned into a monster who hated all living things. The monster became a lich, and its severed head almost instantly turned into its skull. At the moment when the cadets were still screaming, and Lorena, looking seriously at the monster, noted that he was not just a lich. Over the course of eternity, it has consumed countless lives. However, she didn't understand why this monster appeared now. At this point, Todd asked why they had to retreat so suddenly. Roman, rushing forward, ordered them to be silent and look around. Along the way, Jake and Todd noticed a lot of bodies scattered around and asked what it was. All the cadets were dead. Roman frowned and said Jan's name. He recalled the events shortly before teleporting to the Blade Mountain range. Then he approached John and noted that he too had been unable to escape, but asked if the situation was not as dire as it seemed. Since they had so much in common, John decided to tell Roman something. Jan looked at him carefully and ordered him to immediately run through the gate if he felt something terrible approaching. At that moment, Roman realized that John had planned everything, but he didn't understand what exactly he had done. At this time, the Lich, stepping forward, called the cadets before him pathetic mortals who awakened his sleep. Lorena ordered all the cadets to forget about that gate and run to the other gate, number 3, since it was closer. She frowned and repeated that everyone must leave this place. Casa, turning to Lorena, noted that she too should run. However, Lorena, drawing her sword, refused, deciding to stay and hold off the Lich. She assumed a fighting stance, activating her magic and pointing her sword forward, asking Kasu to help the cadets escape. Casa stated that Lorena could not cope alone and wanted to stay too, but Lorena interrupted him, saying that she had to survive for the sake of her family. Casa fell silent, thought for a while, and then agreed and began to run away, promising to follow Lorena's instructions. He clenched his jaw and apologized to Lorena, but he himself understood that he could not die here. Meanwhile, the Lich called Lorena stupid. He asked if she thought she could stop him alone, since she was only mortal. Lorena didn't answer, but she thought it was worth a try since she had 2 advantages. The first was that her sword was made of mithril, which killed undead. She wanted to think about the second advantage, but she was distracted by the Lich. He began to read the spell. The skulls that had been hanging in the air behind the monster multiplied, forming a circle. Then the Lich activated a spell, a magical projectile made of skulls. Lorena moved towards the skulls using the Dark Ceremony resistance jump, and was able to dodge the attacks thanks to the Windwing spell. Noticing several more attacks flying towards her, she threw her sword forward and a flash of magical energy appeared in the air, destroying the skulls. Lorena, taking advantage of the flash, moved behind the Lich, noting that she had a second advantage. She activated magic to strengthen the blow, approached the monster, and magical energy rushed past its body. Lorena said that mages couldn't use attack and defense spells at the same time, and she was confident that she could win by using that. But suddenly she froze, her eyes widening in horror as she heard the Lich cast another spell. It was a seal of protection, and Lorena didn't understand how the Lich could use 2 spells at the same time. Suddenly, Lorena noticed the magic circles in front of the skulls, and wondered if the skulls could use magic too. She was sure it was impossible, and wondered how many spells these skeletons could cast. At that moment, one of the skulls, taking advantage of her distraction, released a magical attack aimed at Lorena, and she did not have time to dodge. The skulls also wrapped around her arms and legs, making her unable to move, and realizing her situation, Lorena cursed. She ordered her immediate release, but the Lich stated that he needed Lorena, turning into a corpse that would serve only him. A skull appeared in the center of the circle, and Lorena watched in horrible mask and was wrapped in fur. It said that the Lich was defenseless and headed towards the stairs. Suddenly it noticed that it had fallen into a magical trap. Magical circles began to glow under its feet. Suddenly, Ian, who was hiding under the skin of this creature, took off his mask, smiled, and noted that everyone greeted him fully armed from the doorway. Discarding the unnecessary skin, he was glad he had prepared in advance, using the volcanic armadillo shell, which was resistant to fire and fire magic. As he continued walking, Ian remembered that there were only 492 magic traps in the lair. 32 were still active, were even more ahead. He used the goblins to lure the Lich out of his lair, and now he needs to get the treasure. That was his original plan. Ian remembered what he learned about the Lich when he was a captain. After returning from the mission, his assistants provided him with a report called Ancient Lich. The losses were so great that the existence of the training center was at risk. As a result, the location of the treasure was determined. The lair was built in ancient times, and there were many items there. Among them were books, the reading of which made a person wise. There were also jewels, and even 1 coin could provide a person with a comfortable life. However, the most important thing was missing: the Vessel of Life. It was a magical egg that contained the Lich's life force and mana. The vessel lost in his past life should be here and now. The remaining half of the Imperial Scroll states that one can accept the vessel's contents, but cannot fully absorb its potential. However, it was not said that by obtaining the Vessel of Life, the mana stones would give much more power. In this case, Yang will be able to master the Divine Dragon's breath. Smiling, he realized that by taking advantage of this opportunity, he could surpass his previous level. He continued walking and finally reached the bottom floor of the lair and soon stopped in front of the gate, where the altar of the ancient Lich should be located. Jan decided to examine it, remembering what was said about this place in the reports. He quickly took a small object out of his pocket and decided to try it out by throwing the dagger at the gate. When he reached them, instead of a blow, a small charge of magical energy was generated. Suddenly, a magic circle lit up in front of the gate, and a magical attack erupted from the circle and was aimed at Jan. But he managed to react. He remembered the reports saying the gates were guarded, and now he realized that what was happening was not at all simple. Even before he reached the gate, Facelock noticed him because it was intangible, and Ian realized that everything was more complicated than it seemed. Gradually, the magical creature began to dissolve, declaring that the face was not recognized. Ian noted that there was one way, and, stepping aside, placed his palm on the wall, assuming that the place described in the report should be here. He finally found the right panel and pressed it, causing the door on the side to open. It was a secret passage created for the transport of slaves. Looking over the layout of the shelter, Ian noted that the labyrinth was filled with primitive traps, and it would take him some time to overcome them. However, being the captain of a special squad, he believed that nothing could stop him, and besides, he had enough time. At this time, the Lich continued to form a magic circle in front of Lorena. Despite the threat, she wondered what such a rotten skeleton, exuding the smell of rot, could do. Lich just laughed and admitted that he couldn't wait to see Lorena's soul suffer. He was going to rip her head out and make her his pet, but he suggested that he could, for example, transplant the head onto the body of an orc. One of the tentacles touched her face, and Lorena pressed her lips together but didn't even flinch. The Lich ordered her to stop chatting, declaring that it was over. The tentacles moved quickly towards her, and the next second blood sprayed into the air. However, when the monster realized what had happened, he froze in surprise. Lorena bit the tentacles with her teeth and stopped them, looking at him furiously, asking if he really thought he could intimidate her. Lich called Lorena impudent, promising that he would not leave a piece of her flesh and turn her into dust. He activated the dark destructive magic Dark Fracture, and his eyes glowed. But suddenly the Lich froze. Lorena looked at him in bewilderment, not understanding why the monster stopped attacking. The Lich looked away, noting that he felt a strange sensation. He asked himself if what he thought had really happened. He shouted that the barrier on the altar had been destroyed, and the gate blocking the way had been broken. And then the monster asked who had entered his lair. The Lich realized that Lorena was just bait and pulled his tentacles, pulling her closer. The Lich leaned towards her, aware that some thief had entered his lair while he was distracted. But Lorena didn't understand what he meant. The monster then angrily ordered her to shut up, using a gravity wave to push her against the wall. Then he turned around and ordered his skulls to return to the shelter and open the gates. The skulls began to spin and opened gate number 127-5. The Lich entered it and announced that he was heading to the altar, after which he disappeared. Gathering her strength, Lorena stood up. She looked in the direction where the Lich had disappeared and asked where he had gone, assuming that he had escaped. At this time, a Lich appeared in the center of the altar along with a magic circle, the monster furiously inquiring who dared to open his altar. He was just stepping back a little. The Lich froze in surprise, noticing the empty vials on the floor, and asked if someone had actually drunk his elixir. These extra elixirs, previously contained in vials, were created by M over 1,000 years to restore his mana and physical strength. The Lich shook with rage, declaring that he had spent 1,000 years trying to be reborn as a human, and now all his work had been wasted. At this point, Yang, who was sitting to the side, asked if the Lich had spoken about these elixirs, noting that they tasted quite good. Hearing his voice, he turned around sharply and indignantly asked if it was he who had broken through the protective barrier. Jan suggested that they calm down first, and then invited him to come over and have a drink together. He asked if the Lich wanted him to save this wonderful drink for him. Ian continued to consume the elixir, and noticed that saving something good for later was not the best solution. The Lich pondered the situation, and was shocked to see that it was not the Mage's Guild or the Emperor's Knights who had pierced his altar, but a drunken boy. Then Ian, distracting the Lich from his thoughts, noted that he was in a hurry to return, and was interfering with his entertainment. It was nice to walk straight through the front door. Jan also said that the Lich did not notice him stealing the rare item and reported that he came through a secret tunnel. The monster asked if the boy was laughing at him, and did not understand why he had broken the barrier at the front entrance. At that moment, Lorena smiled. She was clearly involved in this plan. Leaping into the air, Yang swung his dagger to destroy the monster, and suddenly a bright burst of magical energy appeared in the air. Yan added that in addition to the elixir, there are many ancient texts here, including a book on the mana engine. He asked if the Lich was really so obsessed with collecting these works. Suddenly the monster laughed and asked if Ian knew where he got these books from. The Lich claimed that he became undead for revenge and had been preparing for it for 10 centuries. He was outraged that such an insignificant person as Jan could ruin all his plans. The Lich revealed that in order to take revenge on the one who betrayed him, he cursed himself to exist as an undead. But because of Jan, all his plans were ruined. However, Jan only calmly took a few sips of the elixir, apologizing to the Lich and telling him to continue. Then the Lich suddenly extended his hands, activating magic, and noted that a bastard like Jan thought too much of himself. He activated the Great Flame Breath spell, intending to burn away all of Yang's insolent blood from within. As the Lich approached, Yang opened his eyes, looked at him seriously, and simply told him to stop. Suddenly the Lich froze, stopping at a minimum distance, and asked in surprise what it was. He felt the energy of his own mana, and smiling slightly, Yang noted that he was smart. Then the Lich realized that this guy had his life vessel. He focused on the small glowing magic circle on his body, and the Lich indignantly asked if he had actually eaten it. Then, Yang suddenly ran across the bridge at high speed, with fire magic called Fire Rain rushing after him. The Lich pursuing John called him a failure, and asked if he could escape his own death. Ian continued running, asking if the Lich would die if he killed Ian. However, the monster said that he did not intend to kill him. The Lich announced that he was going to be reborn in Ian's body. If he destroys what he has waited for 1,000 years, he will take John's appearance, considering it a fair exchange. In addition, Jan's body contained the power of the elixir, and the Lich was confident that he could easily take it away. Jan's eyes widened. He wondered if the Lich had really decided to take over his body. He apologized, noting that this was not part of his plans. However, the Lich ordered him to surrender immediately, and promised that he would handle Ian's body with care once it became his. He then activated the parallel chain spell, and several magical seals appeared in the air above Yang. He was extremely surprised and finally realized that he had no other choice, so he activated the Divine Dragon's Breath. The next moment, beams of magical energy began to fly out from the magic circles, and Yang activated the Mana Heart in response. As soon as he did so, beams of magical energy that pierced the circles pierced the floor. Ian immediately appeared behind him and asked if he was worried about him, and admitted that he was flattered by such concern. The monster suddenly extended its hand to the side, activated a new magic circle and tried to attack him. However, Ian was able to dodge the blow. He moved so fast that M saw only bright flashes of magical energy. The protagonist did not expect that everything would turn out this way. He noted that the mana in the heart is in constant motion, like air in the lungs. Then he realized what the true power of the Divine Dragon's Breath was. Ian thought about the monster hearts, magic stones and elixir he had absorbed. He was willing to eat anything to become stronger, even absorb the Lich's life vessel. He remembered how in his past life he had approached it, waiting for the core to dissolve within him. Jan realized that in this way, he would soon restore his strength to the level of his past life, but immediately assumed that he could become even stronger. But suddenly Jan stopped abruptly, asking himself if he had reached a dead end. disappeared, but he was sure that there was definitely a way out. The Lich, approaching, laughed and noted that Jan was a rat choking on poison. He activated all the traps, causing the doors to disappear. Ian noted that under any circumstances he would have to kill the Lich. However, he refused this, realizing that he had no weapons or other tools left and was unable to resist him. Then the Lich, folding his palms, shouted that he would cut off all of Jan's limbs and activated the summoning ritual. A magical monster appeared from the magic circle, and the Lich ordered it to deliver Ian's body to him. Suddenly, a bright flash of magical energy appeared in the air, and Ian noticed that he was surrounded by stone fragments of the monster. Leon, stopping in front of him, asked if everything was alright with him. Then the prince praised him, asking that he now provide the Lich to him. He heard about the emergency during the exam and came here, but he never imagined that such a monster had settled here. He noted that because of Lich, hundreds of cadets died, and not only cadets, but also people under Leon's control suffered. He was irritated that so many talented people died before they could even prove themselves, and noted that he would never forgive the Lich. Suddenly, gently, Ian chuckled, thinking that the prince had arrived just in time, and silently turned to Roman, praising him for his timely actions. Before the first exam, Jan asked Roman to transmit the coordinates to the instructor when he reached the gate, making sure Leon could hear them too. Then the Lich finally spoke, recognizing the flesh and energy, and guessing what it meant. He inquired how Leon was connected to Bahamut. Leon repeated the name with surprise and asked why he was using the name of the founder of the empire in vain. The monster was shocked by the words he heard, and, after the founder was mentioned again, realized that Leon bore the blood of Bahamut. Then Leon frowned in confusion, and the Lich laughed, exclaiming that they had all been extremely naive. He remembered Bahamut remarking that the divine dragon's breath was an outstanding work. He felt that Moman had done a great job, but now he had to die. Looking back, Moman noted that it was a special day that reminded him of old events. He remembered standing in the center of the magic circles, forming a spell. At that time, he was a mage, and was interested in the stable circulation and conservation of the dungeon's energy, and the expansion of the boundaries and absorption of mana. He wondered how much power he could gain by combining all of this. So Moman began experimenting on the body of his close Bahamut. He conducted experiments and they were successful. He was able to fill Bahamut's body with new mana, and thus the mana heart was born. When Moman ended the spell, Bahamut showed his muscles, but the mage ordered him not to show them, but to simply get dressed. Moman noted that he saw a significant change in the numerical readings, and inquired if Bahamut had felt any new sensations. He noted that it felt good, and noted that by using this power, he would be able to create new combat techniques. To a weapon based on the mana heart, and Bahamut named it the Divine Dragon's Breath. Momon added that this was not all the heart could do, intending to explain what would happen if he studied it further. But before he could finish, Bahamut apologized to him. Momon asked in confusion what he was talking about. Suddenly, Bahamut came up from behind and slammed his palm into Momon's body with such force that his hand passed right through him. Without removing his hand, Bahamut informed Momon that his role was complete, and the mage desperately asked how he could do such a thing. Standing before Momon, who had landed on the ground, he admitted that without him, neither the Mana Heart nor the Divine Dragon's Breath could have been created. However, he added that it was time to stop, as Momon knew too much. Bahamut then turned his back and began to walk away, declaring that everything they had created should belong to him alone. At that moment, Momon remembered how much time had passed since his best friend's betrayal. His body, left on the floor, rotted until only a skeleton remained. But thanks to the remnants of magical power, he was able to hold on to his soul. He repeated the same spell, and managed to imprint the effect of these sensations on his rotting body. Momon decided to take revenge, and promised himself that the one who took everything from him would get what he deserved, and the one who betrayed his trust would be punished. At that moment he thought he had been preparing for this for 1,000 years. However, he then frowned as he noticed Leon, his sword drawn, balancing on a fragment of a column. Momon destroyed the pillar and activated the parallel chain-cursed storm spell, promising to turn Leon into dust. However, Leon responded with a secret dragon breathing technique, destroying the magic circles before they were even activated. After that, he activated the Yellow Dragon River, focusing on getting closer to Momon. The Lich, shouting Bahamut's name, noted that even after death, he continued to torment him. Leon became even more angry and ordered the Lich not to dare speak the name of Bahamut in vain. They both activated magic at the same time. But every time Momon created new magic circles, Leon destroyed them with his streams of magical energy, taking the form of a dragon. The Lich noticed that Leon was blocking the activation of the magic circle and knew what he needed to do. He called his slaves to tie Leon's legs. Several magic circles appeared on Leon's back, and skulls began to emerge from them. The prince then asked if the Lich really thought he could stop him with magic alone. He thrust his sword into the floor, declaring that it would be better to meet here together, and with the help of the yellow dragon, he destroyed Momon's spells. Momon was outraged that Leon dared to do this using the fourth form of dark magic, the weapon enhancement spell. In response, Leon used the noble imperial sword, and as they approached each other, their magical energies clashed. The protagonist, watching from the side, noted that it was incredible. He admitted that he couldn't believe that Leon was capable of fighting on equal terms with the Lich. He couldn't determine which of them was actually the monster. Noticing that Leon was using a materialized sword, he guessed that such power could only belong to a dragon. Perhaps it was an effect of the breath. Jan considered this an excellent opportunity to assess the prince's abilities. He watched his actions closely, thinking that he might have to fight him in the future. Smiling, Jan noted to himself that, of course, this would not happen anytime soon, since finding a family was more important right now. He suggested that they should run away, but suddenly Rodrigo asked where he was going, putting his hand on Jan's shoulder, because the fun was just beginning. The protagonist frowned, noting that he had completely forgotten about General Rodrigo. He squeezed his shoulder harder, admitting that it was strange. First the cadets ran away. Now the Lich appeared. Moreover, Cadet 974, Ian, found himself in the center of events again. Then Jan turned to Rodrigo, calling him Captain. But suddenly he frowned and declared that he should be addressed as Mr. Captain. Jan didn't argue and simply agreed, but Rodrigo continued, noting with dissatisfaction that modern education left much to be desired. Then Ian remembered the moment when Damien and Rodrigo met after the escape. Although the chief instructor tried to hide the fact of the escape, it still became known. Of the escaped cadets, only 4 left the camp, and their ranks ranged from 10 to 900. 3 were captured in the woods shortly after their escape, and while searching for the last cadet, members of the 3rd Pursuit Group were found dead. Then Rodrigo remembered that the cadet who escaped had the number 974, and now he realized that he was the main character. Ian frowned and looked at him seriously. And then Rodrigo added that he had heard that even Damien had been forced to look for him. He then asked how he managed to survive at such a low rank, and now he was able to survive a battle with an ancient Lich. Then the protagonist smiled and noted that this was bad luck. Ian smiled even wider and said that it was super luck, hinting that he had done a lot of good in his past life. He explained that he had no chance of escape, and if a little more time had passed, he would have become a victim of the Lich. But then Leon suddenly saved him. Rodrigo still asked incredulously if it was really just luck, and wondered if Jan believed he would accept his words as truth. The protagonist said that he was indeed lucky, and asked if Rodrigo was going to punish him just for his luck. He smiled, and Rodrigo again called him shameless, because he did not understand how he could behave so brazenly. He only had the number 974, and Rodrigo guessed that the protagonist might be the bastard of some important nobleman. He was suddenly distracted by Jan's question, asking if he could help Leon. Rodrigo noted that this was stupid, because if the protagonist joined the fight, he would only hinder Leon. Jan initially wanted to object, but eventually resigned himself and decided that there was no room for anyone else. He frowned and thought that the Lich had lost its life vessel, but was still not dead. He wondered if the vessel had been completely absorbed. If he activated the mana heart using the remaining power of the life vessel, he supposed it might help. While he was thinking, Leon declared that it was the end and swung his sword to strike Momon, but he dodged it. Continuing to attack, Leon mockingly asked what happened, wondering why Momon was running away. But the Lich simply ordered him to be silent. Suddenly, he noticed that the flow of mana was decreasing and felt like someone was sucking out his magical power. Then Momon realized it and turned to Yang, who, noticing the Lich's attention, smiled. Momon realized that all of this was because of him. He noticed that the main character treated him with disdain and decided that he would not look into anything. Leon frowned as he watched, and the Lich shouted that he was going to take over the body and began to tear it apart. The prince, noticing this, asked in horror if this was really what he thought. Momon said that he no longer needed this body and promised to kill everyone, and then a magic circle appeared on the torn part of his body. Leon cried out, realizing that this was domain expansion. He remembered that this state allowed the caster's hidden desire to be realized in the real world. Only the heads of the 4 strongest families in the Empire, excluding the Emperor himself, can use this technique. Momon meanwhile declared that the descendant of Bahamut must die. Leon realized with horror that the Lich intended to kill everyone, including himself. Ian frowned, noting that he couldn't allow this to happen. He placed his palm on his chest and completely emptied the mana heart, transferring the energy to the Lich. It was all the energy of the life vessel. Then Leon, noticing the gap in the defense, decided to put an end to it and used the yellow dragon's 5 senses, activating magical energy. But when he struck, his sword broke and the Lich took no damage. He shouted that all attempts were in vain, since the technique of expanding the domain was active. But Leon wasn't about to give up. Clutching the rest of the sword in his palm, he commanded the dragon sword to come closer. Leon used the yellow dragon's 5 senses again and struck, and this time he managed to cut the Lich's body in half. Momon said that it wasn't over yet, but Leon declared that he was finished. The Lich was irritated that everything happened before his eyes, and he realized that it was all in vain. He had been secretly plotting for 1,000 years, holding a grudge for 1,000 years, and now because of one boy, all was lost. Momon turned to Bahamut, noting that if all this was for his sake, then his life was not in vain. The Lich didn't understand why they did this, but before he could finish his question, his body completely disintegrated. Leon simply closed his eyes and there was silence for a while. Then he announced that it was all over. He noted that the Lich had used domain expansion, and realized that if the move had been executed perfectly, they would no longer exist. The prince admitted with disappointment that he was still weak. Rodrigo noted that Leon was tired. He did not believe that he himself decided to fight the Lich, since as a prince he should have acted differently. However, Leon stopped him, warning that it was turning into a grumble. Then he noticed Ian and asked if he was hurt. Jan reported that the prince had saved his life, ordered Jan to be escorted to the medical unit. As they walked back, Jan's blade ridge had thus been realized, and the results had exceeded expectations. He created the mana heart using the vessel of life and learned what Leon was capable of. Smiling, Jan thanked Momon for making all of this happen with his help. They left without noticing that there was a scrap of clothing left on the floor, under which Momon's eye was still glowing. Having settled into his office, Jan noted that he hadn't rested like this for a long time. It seemed to him that everything that happened in the mountains happened a long time ago. However, suddenly Jan noticed that the cadets were living in this place, which looked like a mansion, and he realized that all aristocrats lived in such places. The hero noted that this castle was very different from the mass grave in which he had previously lived, which was only 5 square meters. The mansion, which had an area of 84 square meters, had a bed, a sofa, a shower, and even food. Jan thoughtfully noted that he had passed the exam after all, remembering that the grades had recently been announced. The instructor reported that the first test had been interrupted due to an emergency. But thanks to Leon's bravery, the situation was quickly resolved. He explained that cadets ranked 1st to 10th would receive the highest score, 11th to 100th would receive an average score, and the remaining cadets would receive a low score. The cadets watched the proceedings closely, and Casa noticed that the senior instructor had not appeared. The instructor noted that the cadets' living conditions also depend on their grades. He added that those who achieve high scores will be given access to the Imperial Armory. The cadets were shocked to hear that they would be allowed to enter the armory, which contained treasures, books from the founding of the Empire, and weapons. There were hundreds of the latest swords there, and some claimed that the library in the armory was the size of an entire fortress. Cadets who took the first 10 places could go up to the 3rd floor. Those in 100th place could go up to the 2nd floor, and the rest could only go up to the 1st floor. Roman heard that he was ranked 5th, even though he had managed to defeat the largest number of rare goblins in the mountain range. The instructor continued by announcing that 4th place had been taken by Cruel, who had defeated the troll lair alone. Casa smiled, noting that it was quite easy. The instructor reported that he had taken 3rd place for suppressing an orc village without injury. 2nd place went to Lorena, who defeated the golden ogre on her own. The cadets were surprised, thinking that Lorena should have taken 1st place, and Casa asked who the leader was then. However, Lorena herself was not upset about 2nd place, as she understood that this was just a conditional ranking. Her 1st place was an illusion, because she couldn't cope with a real monster. An ancient lich, she knew that she had to become stronger. Suddenly her thoughts were interrupted by Cruel's mocking remark. He contemptuously called Lorena a princess, and noted that she looked funny. Cruel added that she was too arrogant, as if she could save everyone, but she couldn't hold on to her place in the ranking. He remembered that some believed she was the only one capable of stopping the Lich, and noted that it was. Cruel also said that there is another interesting rumor that she didn't actually fight the monster at all. In fact, she only just managed to convince this crowd of guests to spare her life. Lorena was silent for a moment, then admitted that it was true. She explained that her skills were not enough to defeat the Lich. As she walked away from Cruel, she thanked him for his concern about the rumors, but asked why he shouldn't worry about his own grades. Cruel snorted and asked her to repeat it, then noted with a grin that she was a very good person. He suggested that she could take the place of the late Duke Wolf. Cruel reminded about the heir of the Wolf family. Lorena's brother was supposed to be the heir, but after his death, the title remained vacant. He assumed that Lorena wanted to get it, and noted that now was the best time to do so. Suddenly, he suggested that it was possible that Lorena had arranged everything herself to get a chance. If this was true, he praised her. Lorena decided to ask him a question in that case. Looking at him angrily, Lorena asked him to guess whether he would die now or not. She considered it a simple question. Cruel waved his hand and agreed, allowing her to see for herself, since he was sure that she was no different from him. He concentrated magical energy near his hand, noting that he couldn't stand her acting as if she was alone here. He challenged her to attack, promising to defeat her and remove her mask. But before he could attack, someone grabbed his ear. Cruel asked in a rage who dared to do this. He screamed, begging the man to let go of his ear, feeling like it was about to come off. The instructor then asked permission to announce the name of the student who had won first place, and announced that it was Yang, number 974. But Jan, who was holding Cruel's ear, did not react. And then Cruel called him a savage, and asked if he really had won first place. The other cadets were also shocked that such a low-ranking cadet took first place. The cadets began to discuss among themselves whether number 974 had really managed to rise so high. Someone remembered having heard about him before. Lorena asked if he had really become a leader. Cruel wondered how someone like the protagonist could achieve such a thing, and wanted to say what would happen if he wasn't released immediately. However, Jan looked at him threateningly and asked what would happen. Having calmed down, Cruel simply looked down, noting that nothing would happen, and admitted that he was in great pain. Suddenly, Lorena noted that they had not seen each other for a long time. The hero addressed Miss Lorena with respect, but she asked him not to call her that. She then asked how he and Cruel met. Ian explained that they crossed paths during an exam. Lorena understood that he was an unusual person. She could not believe that the main character was able to scare Cruel. Moreover, she felt a power in him that was ready to explode at any moment. She wanted to ask Jan several questions, but she could only say one. She recalled that Cruel had been abusing him for a long time. A little later, Jan received his own quarters for first place, but sitting around doing nothing turned out to be more difficult than he expected. He took a book from the Imperial Arsenal and thought for a while, distracted from reading. Then, looking up, he told the man standing behind the door to come in. Opening the door, the guest asked how the protagonist knew that he was standing outside. He assumed that he had made too much noise. It was Damien who, upon entering the room, asked if it was true that the protagonist had not forgotten about the unresolved issues between them. Once Damien had settled into his room and tasted the wine, Ian asked him if he liked it. He noted that if he had known about Damien's visit in advance, he would have prepared. And then Damien added that the drink was tolerable. The hero asked if it was true that the instructor's aura could not be removed even if he was out of sight. But Damien said that it was a lie. Ian then asked how the prince had made him do it, and Damien suggested that Ian was another one of Leon's crushes. He asked the hero what else he could do in such a situation. Damien, stirring the wine in his glass, admitted that he did not want to upset the prince. However, he still wanted to kill Jan. He smiled and said he had just received a report on number 52 in Simons County. Ian listened carefully, and Damien added that there was nothing there. Ian noted that this was expected, but Damien exclaimed that no one had lived there for several years. Jan assumed that Rodrigo, whom he called the Old Fox, had something to do with it. He noted that he understood that he was being followed and skillfully covered his tracks. However, Damien said that he would not accuse him of lying, since it no longer mattered to him. It was about something else. With a light slam on the floor, Damien activated the Dark Spirit Sword. Suddenly, sharp streams of magical energy, bursting out of the floor, headed towards Ian, destroying the table standing nearby. But hearing the hero's voice, Damien froze in surprise, looking at the cloud of dust after the blow. Ian said that he didn't think it was necessary for Damien to kill him. Damien wondered if the protagonist had actually repelled the attack. Then Jan noted that he had found a very important piece of the puzzle. Noticing the book, Damien asked what kind of book it was. He read its title, A Study in Energy Interruption. Ian took it from the Imperial Armory, although he was given access to the third floor, where the main armory was located. But he decided to go down to the first floor, where there was a special library, where books and scientific research collected by the rulers of the past were kept. Most of the books were about research into monster handling techniques, and he discarded unwanted copies until he finally stopped. Ian found a scientific study on energy interruption written by Captain Rodrigo. Energy interruption is a disease in which a person's internal energy does not circulate properly. As people age, their energy becomes depleted, and in most cases, such people die before reaching the age of 20. Taking the book and studying its contents, Damien asked in surprise what the problem was. Ian noted that this was strange. He didn't understand why the captain of the Special Forces was investigating energy interruptions, since Rodrigo didn't have such a disease. He added that Rodrigo had chosen a very interesting question to research, noting that he had no interruption of energy. Jan suggested that if his daughter was sick, that would explain the choice of topic, due to her lack of energy. She always stayed home, which matched the symptoms. To treat his daughter, Rodrigo continued to research the disease. Jan realized that he had previously considered Rodrigo's daughter to be his weak point. But things turned out differently. For the sake of her treatment, Rodrigo was forced to move, because finding a good doctor is not easy at all. Damien then frowned and asked if that meant the captain's daughter wasn't his weak spot. The protagonist smiled and admitted that Damien wouldn't be able to keep Rodrigo on a short leash with his daughter's help, but instead, he will be able to hold the captain's life in his hands. Until this point, there was no cure for energy interruption, and a large number of drugs were required to maintain health. Rodrigo himself could not have earned so much money, and noted that it clearly could not have been done without embezzlement from the budget. The ideal place for this was, of course, a special unit. He understood that if there was evidence of theft of funds, then Rodrigo could be destroyed. Ian stated that hunting the old fox would not be difficult for Damien. He himself reflected that everything he had just said was just an assumption. The protagonist admitted that this was just a guess for now, but noted that if everything turned out to be true, then they would be able to bury the captain. Besides, they weren't taking any risks, and Damien had every reason to investigate, since the embezzlement of funds was illegal. Damien repeated Ian's words that he had every reason to act. And then, looking at the main character, he said that it was not bad. He then threw him a book and added that he had a man on the Special Forces audit team, so the plan would be easy to implement. He instructed the protagonist to try to find out more about the disease for now, held to himself, and noted that this was incredible, realizing that everything he had told Damien had turned out to be true. Rodrigo really did steal money to pay for his daughter's treatment, and this news resonated so much in his past life that he still remembered it. He was suddenly distracted when Damien caught his attention. He asked if Jan had really given up the opportunity to get to the 3rd floor for the sake of the book. He was surprised that he had given up the weapon. Then Ian asked what the point of a weapon was if it couldn't help, and Damien didn't argue and promised to personally compensate for this loss. He added that from that moment on his training in the main program was completed. The protagonist frowned and asked in bewilderment what this meant. Then Damien looked at him and said that Ian would now become his apprentice. The main character froze in shock, realizing that this was really true. He smiled. Then Damien, walking towards the door, said that he really liked him, and that he was not like the weaklings he had met at the academy. Jan thought it was a great opportunity to get closer to the instructor, but he had his doubts. So he asked Damien if he was worthy of being his apprentice, and Damien noted that Ian was a talented warrior who masterfully attacked him from ambush. However, Jan noted that he had eventually caught up with him, and he was afraid that an inexperienced cadet like him would only ruin his reputation. Irritated, Damien abruptly ordered that this conversation be stopped, after which he shouted that the protagonist would become his new student. When the protagonist was left alone in the room, he thought that it was good that Damien left, because he was already starting to irritate him. Jan, looking at the family heirloom in his hands, realized that now he could get closer to it. A memory of seeing the tattoo on Damien's shoulder flashed through Ian's mind. He realized that this symbol was his family's secret, and he knew that he had a chance to reveal this secret. Immediately after these events, the hero went to training arena number 3. It was only accessible to high-ranking instructors. Even cadets from noble families did not have access to this arena. There, Jan performed one-arm push-ups. Soon the protagonist stood in the center of the arena and decided to take a break. He noticed that the place was boring due to the fact that he was alone. He felt his body begin to change thanks to the introduction of the mana heart, but he realized that the changes were happening too slowly. Looking at his muscles, Ian realized that he had a lot of training ahead of him to ensure that his strength matched his internal energy. Jan thought that access to the arena was granted thanks to the senior instructor, but those around him reacted differently to his privileges. An enraged Roman irritably remarked that Ian was incredibly pathetic, while Casa noted that he was a talented cadet and asked if he would become his friend. The hero also realized that Lorena began to follow him even more closely. He also felt like the instructor was impressed that he had chosen the 1st floor of the treasury, but the book was just a ruse. Throwing it aside, Ian picked up another book, thinking that this was indeed what he was looking for. He was holding a book about the founding of the empire, and although it looked more like an ordinary history textbook, it would become a sensation in the future. Jan himself now has a mana heart, but he is still unable to use the divine dragon's breath to its full extent. This breath was created by Emperor Bahamut in conjunction with Momon, and the hero realized that to master this technique, he needed the strength of both. And now he also needed the knowledge of the founding emperor, and Yang even thought that with this state of affairs, he felt sorry for Momon. After all, everything he worked so hard for was taken away, and then he was killed, which is a good reason to become a vengeful monster. He opened the book about the founding of the empire and decided to study its contents, asking himself if there was something inside that could help him. Suddenly, the protagonist's eyes widened in surprise when he looked into the book, and he asked in amazement what it was. Jan looked at the blank pages and wondered if there was anything inside. He noticed that the other pages were blank as well, but he remembered the rumor that the book had been written by the founding emperor. Yang reasoned that the emperor might have even killed Momon to become the sole wielder of the divine dragon's breath. Then Ian looked at the book again with a thoughtful expression on his face, when suddenly a dark hand approached him from behind his back. He felt something behind him and turned around sharply, but found no one. Jan looked around warily and asked himself what it was, because he felt like he was being watched. After that, he looked back at the book and noticed that there was still nothing inside, but suddenly an idea.
In India today, expenses rise relentlessly while salaries barely move. To counter this, a brand new
idea came to his mind. Suddenly, dark energy, like several magical slashes, struck out of the air. The hero looked closely at the column and thought that he had tried to cut it, but still failed. He noted to himself that he was still not strong enough to match the senior instructor. Suddenly, a sinister laugh was heard in the training ground building, after which a voice turned to Jan and called him a fool. Jan looked towards the column where the voice came from and heard that he would not be able to solve the mystery of the book. Suddenly, Momon appeared from behind the column, calling Jan a stupid child and noting that they hadn't seen each other for a long time. Puzzled, Ian loudly asked him how he got here. He remembered how Leon tore the Lich's body into many pieces. Momon suddenly laughed and said that now he understood something. Even such pathetic creatures as he could become a nuisance if ignored for long enough. As he approached Jan, Momon shouted that insects like him were especially annoying before he suddenly rushed forward, preparing to strike the hero. Jan cursed, and Momon continued to shout that he would kill him at any cost. Suddenly, the main character's face changed. Yang looked at Momon and saw that from under the hood appeared a furious female face with a magical pentagram on her forehead. But Jan realized that Momon's appearance couldn't deceive him. Even now, despite her appearance, she was still a lich. Suddenly, Momon commanded Jan to die and pass through his body but did not harm him. Ian watched in bewilderment as she walked through him again and again, smiling widely and laughing furiously. He began to think that this was not a ghost, but a manifestation of thoughts. Jan came to the conclusion that perhaps even after Momon's life vessel had been transformed into a mana heart, Momon remained as a manifestation of her ideas. He decided that Momon wasn't really dangerous, since she couldn't harm him at that moment, but her behavior was starting to irritate him. After that, Yang asked Momon to listen to him and asked why she was still wandering in this world. Then he asked about her appearance. In response, Momon laughed and said that all this time she had been a walking corpse, but now she had returned to the appearance of the days when she was a living sorceress. Levitating in the air, she asked Ian if he thought she would just disappear, and now, upon returning, she could kill every last one of them. With a wild smile and a crazy look, she declared that she would destroy everyone who betrayed her. Yang watched Momon with a serious expression, and then noticed that she was starting to shrink. Momon explained that this way her magical abilities are used more economically. After this, Ian asked how she was going to take revenge. He noticed that her appearance now looked like the result of plastic surgery. Momon explained that she was maintaining the manifestation only through the energy of his mana heart, but the connection was too weak to show his full form. Momon then asked why her energy levels were so low after all the elixir she drank. Yang reasoned to himself that at the moment it did not threaten him directly, but he felt a weak flow of mana that was being transmitted to Momon. However, the fact that this path was open explained that Momon could become a hindrance in the future. His opponent is one of the most powerful mages, and if in the future she becomes a parasite on his mana, he will not be able to prevent it. At that moment, Momon tried to strike with a sly smile, but Yang turned around, and Momon pretended that she hadn't planned anything like that. Then Ian, holding the book in his hands, noted that nothing could be done about it. He said that she should see this world before she disappeared. Momon asked Jan not to be sarcastic and noticed that he was having trouble adapting to mana, asking how he decided to get rid of it. Then Ian replied that she was no different from a human, and he just needed to break the connection with her. The hero explained to her that she was merely a parasite on his mana heart, and if he cut off the flow of mana, she would not be able to maintain her manifestation. He then ordered her to disappear and noted that her time had long since ended. But Momon, with a frightened expression, began to deny it and shouted that she must stay alive, adding that she must never disappear. Then she sharply asked Ian to wait. She turned her attention to the book that Ian was holding and asked if he wanted to know its secret. Soon after, Yang cut his palm with the sharp blade of a knife, and thick blood began to drip onto the pages of the book. He noted that it was necessary to sprinkle the pages with this blood, which contained the breath of the divine dragon. Momon then extended her hand in front of her and said that if mana was gradually directed into the blood, it would begin to turn into letters. Jan looked at the book with a surprised expression, as symbols began to appear from drops of blood. An inscription appeared on the pages, and Ian said to himself, "Light and darkness." Then he asked in bewilderment if these two components merged. He turned to Momon, asking if she didn't understand the meaning, and she, also looking at the book, admitted that she didn't know what Bahamut had written. Yang looked at the book with a tense expression, and noted that the founding emperor could not have written such nonsense. Soon the protagonist's face distorted, his eyes widened, and he screamed in surprise as the letters began to fly. They rose higher and higher, and Jan, amazed, noticed that the hovering letters began to form words. The words and phrases hanging in the air began to approach Ian and envelop his body. Then, covered in words, he exclaimed that they were gathering in one place, in the heart of Mana. The hero understood that these words through the heart of Mana form a new one. Suddenly, Momon turned to Jan, who looked forward in surprise and dropped the book from his hands. She asked why he had dropped it so suddenly. And Ian, with a puzzled expression on his face, wondered if he had imagined it all. He then looked at his palm and noticed that the letters were rearranging themselves into other words and forming a new Mana heart. Then, looking at the book lying on the floor, he turned to Bahamut, wondering what great secret he was hiding here. After that, Yang walked forward, asking Momon to follow him, and said that he would find a way in the future. Ian explained to her that he would look for a way to find a new body for her. He also noted that she would not be able to parasitize on him forever. Momon first looked at him with surprise, and then with a joyful expression on her face. She asked him if this was really true, but Ian asked her not to be too happy. He was not going to help her for nothing. He then warned her not to do anything strange. Momon nodded with a sly smile, and then her face twisted as she called Ian a fool, and asked if he thought she would help someone like him. She reasoned that she simply didn't have enough energy now, but as soon as she had enough, he would die first. Suddenly, Jan turned around and she pretended she hadn't planned anything like that. After some time, the story moves to a large building located among tall trees. Ian made a sharp blow with his hand, pulling it back and then sharply pushing it forward. After this, Jan returned to his fighting stance. He then looked forward with a serious expression at Damien, who stood opposite him with an impassive face. Jan frowned and with a sharp jerk rushed into the attack. However, Damien's foot, which was standing on the concrete, was suddenly enveloped in magical energy. Then, from Damien's open palm, a magical liquid began to flow, and soon it materialized into the shape of a sword. Damien, with his eyes closed and holding the sword in his hands, placed it in front of him and began to swing it. Ian watched this in bewilderment, after which Damien, with a sharp movement of his hand, pointed the sword at Ian. He managed to put his forearm in front of himself, blocking the blow. Damien's sharp chopping blow destroyed the massive arches behind Ian, and the powerful energy completely tore apart the space around him. The huge tree behind Ian was also cut down by Damien's powerful attack, leaving only stumps. Damien then turned to Ian. He noted that he fought with the desire to kill him, despite the fact that Ian was weak, and he did not even know if he would survive. Jan, holding onto the remaining stump with his legs, said that he would not kill him in sparring, since he had not yet explained how to block such attacks. Then Damien told him to use all his self-defense skills and work with his hands, and advised him to jump higher using centrifugal force. Jan realized that the paragraph from the book about the
सिराज के 3 ओवर्स बाकी के बहुत सारे ऑप्शंस हैं, प्लेंटी ऑफ ऑप्शंस, और शायद उसी में फंस रहे हैं कप्तान शुभमन गिल। पटकी हुई गेंद और इस बार ऑफ स्टंप से बाहर और उसको पॉइंट की तरफ मारने की कोशिश थी, लेकिन कवर्स की तरफ मार बैठे कूपर कॉनली। फील्डर तैनात रोहित शर्मा के रूप में वहां पर एक भी रन नहीं इस बॉल पर। हर्षदीप सिंह उम्मीद करते हैं कि जल्द ठीक हो जाएंगे, पूरी स्ट्रेचिंग कर चुके हैं वो। हर्षदीप सिंह के 3 ओवर, मोहम्मद सिराज के 3 ओवर्स, और हर्षदीप सिंह तो डेथ ओवर्स में गेंदबाजी करते हैं भारतीय टीम के लिए। T20 में बहुत गेंदबाजी करते हैं डेथ ओवर्स में। आखिरी गेंद ओवर की, कूपर कॉनली, उन्होंने सम्मान दिया बॉल को, दबाती हुई गेंद टैप किया, रन के लिए दौड़े और रन कंप्लीट भी किया। ओवर समाप्त, और इसी के साथ 216 पर 5 टीम ऑस्ट्रेलिया। 40 ओवरों के बाद आखिरी 60 गेंदों में 49 रनों की जरूरत है टीम ऑस्ट्रेलिया को। बहुत मजा आने वाला है आखिरी 60 गेंदों में। और देखना पड़ेगा कि क्या वॉशिंगटन सुंदर की तरफ रुख करेंगे कप्तान या फिर नहीं। यहां से आपके साथ जुड़ेंगे अब के पंक सर स्वागत है आपका।
तो चलिए 40 ओवर पर ऑस्ट्रेलिया ने 216 रन बना दिए और मात्र 49 रन दूर हैं जीत से। इस वक्त कूपर कॉनली और ओवन दोनों ने मिलकर के 24 गेंदों पर 29 रन जोड़ लिए हैं। ऑस्ट्रेलिया की बल्लेबाजी पर अगर नजर डालें तो मिशेल मार्श और ट्रेविस हेड के विकेट गिरने के बाद मैथ्यू शॉट और मैट रेनशॉ ने अच्छी बल्लेबाजी दिखाई। मैथ्यू शॉट ने 74 रन बनाया, मैट रेनशॉ 30 रन, एलेक्स कैरी सस्ते में 9 रन बना करके आउट हुए। पर उसके बाद कूपर कॉनली और मिशेल ओवन दोनों अच्छी बल्लेबाजी कर रहे हैं और इस वक्त अच्छी साझेदारी दोनों बल्लेबाजों के बीच हमें पनपती हुई दिख रही है। इस वक्त ऑस्ट्रेलिया को जीतने के लिए अब आखिरी 10 ओवर यानी कि 60 गेंदों पे मात्र 49 रनों की आवश्यकता है। गेंदबाजी पर आ चुके हैं अक्षर पटेल, बल्लेबाजी पे है ओवन। पहली गेंद ओवर की मिशेल ओवन ने इस गेंद को खेल दिया पॉइंट की तरफ 1 रन के लिए। कूपर कॉनली अब सामना करने वाले हैं आने वाले गेंदों का। 40.1 ओवर, ऑस्ट्रेलिया 217 रन 5 विकेटों के नुकसान पर। दूसरी गेंद लेकर के चलेंगे अक्षर पटेल, सामने है ओवन। 16 गेंदों पर 24 रन बना करके ये कर रहे हैं बल्लेबाजी। अगली गेंद हल्के हाथों से गेंद को खेलते हुए दिखे बल्लेबाज। इस गेंद से कोई रन नहीं। 40.2 ओवर पे ऑस्ट्रेलिया 217 पर 5। अब चाहिए 58 गेंदों पर 48 रन जीतने के लिए ऑस्ट्रेलिया को। सो एनसीडी का स्वागत है। हमारे साथ कई सारे मित्र हैं, आप सभी साथियों का बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद लगातार बने रहने के लिए। अगली गेंद अक्षर पटेल की तीसरी गेंद। इस बार इस गेंद को खेल दिया कॉनली ने लॉन्ग ऑफ की दिशा पे 1 रन के लिए। भारतीय टीम अगर इस मुकाबले को नहीं जीतेगी तो फिर ऑस्ट्रेलिया इस सीरीज को 2-0 से पहले ही जीत जाएगी और आखिरी मुकाबला जीतने के बावजूद भारत सीरीज से बाहर हो जाएगी। अगली गेंद, इस गेंद को ऑन साइड पर खेल दिया है बल्लेबाज कॉनली ने 1 रन के लिए। 40.4 ओवर पे ऑस्ट्रेलिया 219 पर 5। पांचवी गेंद आने वाली है अक्षर पटेल की, सामने कॉनली। अक्षर पटेल की 5वीं गेंद पर पड़ गया चौका और अब जीत से की दूरी पे है इस वक्त टीम ऑस्ट्रेलिया। 55 गेंदें बाकी, जीतने के लिए चाहिए 42 रन। अगली गेंद और इसे भी
FID protected card holder with a pop.
और अब धीरे धीरे जीत के बहुत करीब, मात्र 36 रन दूर ऑस्ट्रेलिया जीत से। 41 ओवर के बाद ऑस्ट्रेलिया 229 पर 5। मुश्किलें बढ़ गई है अब टीम इंडिया की। ओवन 20 गेंदों पर 35, वहीं कॉनली 37 गेंदों पर 37 रन बना करके बल्लेबाजी कर रहे हैं। अक्षर पटेल के 10 ओवर से 52 रन आए, 1 सफलता मिली। आखिरी ओवर महंगा चला गया उनका, 13 रन चले गए इस ओवर से। और अब मोहम्मद सिराज को बुलाया जा रहा है गेंदबाजी पर। तेज गेंदबाज मोहम्मद सिराज करने वाले हैं गेंदबाजी। अपना 8वां ओवर डालेंगे, सामने है कॉनली। छत्तीस रनों की आवश्यकता है ऑस्ट्रेलिया को जीतने के लिए। गेंद बची है 54।